There is a question that nobody in American history has fully answered. Not in 1916, not in 1939, when a court finally confirmed what anyone paying attention already knew. Not in 1979, when the last check was written. The question is simple. Who received the warnings about Black Tom? And why did nothing move? This is the story of a telegraph operator, a pier loaded with £2 million of explosives, a network of German saboteurs operating out of a brownstone 4 miles from the target, and the most consequential act of terrorism on American soil before September 11th, 2001. Most people have never heard of it. That is not an accident. In the summer of 1916, if you stood at the edge of Black Tom Island in Jersey City, New Jersey, and looked east across the water, you could see her torch burning. The Statue of Liberty, less than 2,000 feet away, lit up New York Harbor every night. It was a distance you could row in 20 minutes. At a distance, a skilled man with a strong back and something to prove could cover in silence, in darkness, without anyone noticing. The man at the telegraph key that summer was doing what telegraph operators at rail depots did: processing cargo manifests, routing shipment confirmations, relaying security dispatches up and down the Lehigh Valley Railroad's communications network. His was a job built on precision. Every message logged, every transmission documented, every number counted. He knew what sat on Black Tom better than almost anyone, because the inventory moved through his hands in the form of outbound cables every day. What he knew, and what anyone who read those cables should have understood, was that Black Tom in July 1916 was not a railroad yard. It was a bomb, 2 million pounds of it, small arms ammunition, artillery shells. And sitting at the end of Pier 7, tied to the dock because its owner wanted to avoid a $25 towing fee, was Johnson Barge Number 17, loaded with 100,000 pounds of TNT and 417 cases of artillery fuses, all of it bound for Russia. That barge was not supposed to be there. The paperwork said so. The cables said so. Somebody with access to those cables could have moved it at any point in the days before July 30th. Nobody did. America was neutral. That is the word that explains almost everything that follows and excuses almost nothing. 2 years into the bloodiest war in human history, the United States was officially selling weapons to anyone who could buy them, which in practice, because Britain's Royal Navy controlled the Atlantic, meant selling exclusively to the Allies. President Woodrow Wilson understood this. The German government understood this. The German ambassador in Washington, Count Johann Heinrich von Bernstorff, had been running a network of saboteurs from the capital since 1914 specifically to address this imbalance. His solution was not diplomacy. His solution was fire. By the spring of 1916, that network had been busy. Between 1915 and early 1917, 43 American factories and munitions facilities suffered explosions or fires that investigators would eventually link to German agents. The weapon of choice was a device called a glass pencil, a small glass tube filled with 2 chemicals separated by a membrane. When the glass was crushed, the chemicals mixed and ignited after a delay that could be calibrated to the hour, giving the saboteurs time to establish alibis before anything burned. The device had been developed by Germany's Abteilung 3B intelligence unit and manufactured in Karlsruhe. By 1916, it had already been used to start fires on merchant ships crossing the Atlantic. Insurance companies knew about it. port investigators knew about it. In April 1916, 3 months before Black Tom, the New York City bomb squad arrested 9 German agents and charged them specifically with using glass pencil incendiaries to ignite munitions ships in New York Harbor. The trial was public. The testimony about the cigar bombs, as they were also called, ran in the newspapers. Anyone working in munitions security in the New York area in the summer of 1916 had access to this information. The Lehigh Valley Railroad had been warned about security vulnerabilities at their terminals. The Bureau of Investigation, the FBI's predecessor, was aware that German sabotage operations were targeting American ports. The Bureau had 260 employees to cover the entire country, but the intelligence existed. It moved through official channels. Some of it moved through telegraph lines. None of it reached Black Tom. The man at the key processed his manifests. Johnson barge. Number 17 sat in the harbor. And in a 4-story brownstone on 15th Street in Manhattan, approximately 4 miles from the pier, 2 men were finishing their preparations. Kurt Janke was not who you would picture as the most dangerous German agent operating in North America. He was a naturalized American citizen who had served in the United States Marine Corps. He was calm, methodical, and completely invisible inside American society. His assistant was Lothar Witzke, a German naval lieutenant who had escaped British internment in Chile by jumping a merchant ship in San Francisco, making his way east, and eventually arriving in New York with a new identity and a precise set of skills acquired aboard the German light cruiser SMS Dresden before its scuttling. Witzke was a powerful oarsman from years on the Baltic. He would need that strength. Their third man was already in place. Michael Christoph was 23 years old, a Slovak immigrant who lived with relatives in Bayonne, New Jersey, the next town over from Jersey City. He had briefly served in the United States Army. He knew the area around Black Tom. He had been paid $500, roughly $14,000 in today's money, to provide access to the pier and to set fire to specific points on foot while the other 2 arrived by water. $500. That is what the security of £2 million of munitions was worth, because the Lehigh Valley Railroad had stationed a night watch so thin that 3 men, 1 on foot, 2 in a rowboat, could walk through it. On the night of Saturday, July 29th, the harbor was quiet. The torch of the Statue of Liberty burned across the water the way it always did. Soldiers stationed on nearby Bedloe's Island, directly beside the statue, could see the lights of Black Tom reflected in the water. They did not see a rowboat. Janke carried a compact wooden box containing their supply of glass pencils, each one wrapped in gauze. He had already confirmed with the intelligence passed to him through the German consular network that Pier 7 and Johnson barge number 17 were the primary target. 100,000 pounds of TNT capable of detonating everything else on the island in sequence. The fires began sometime after midnight. The exact sequence was never fully reconstructed because the evidence burned with everything else. What is known is that guards spotted the first fires and that some of them fled, understanding immediately what a fire near £2 million of explosives meant. Others attempted to fight the flames and eventually called the Jersey City Fire Department. The department arrived. The fires were already past containment. At 2:08 in the morning on Sunday, July 30th, 1916, Johnson barge, number 17, detonated. The shockwave moved at 24,000 feet per second. It registered as a 5.5 magnitude earthquake at seismic stations across the region. Every window within 25 miles shattered simultaneously. The crater left in the pier measured 375 feet by 175 feet. Across the water, the shockwave hit the Statue of Liberty with the force of a sustained artillery barrage. Shrapnel from exploding shells embedded itself in the statue's copper skin, and the structural damage to the torch arm was so severe that the National Park Service would close it to visitors permanently. That closure is still in effect today. If you have ever wondered why you cannot climb to the torch of the Statue of Liberty, the answer is a rowboat, a wooden box of glass tubes, and a $25 towing fee that someone refused to pay in 1916. On Ellis Island, directly across the channel, a telephone operator named Owen Fitzpatrick was on night shift. He was thrown from his chair by the first blast and found himself on the floor of the hallway as broken glass rained down from every window in the building. The entire island had to be evacuated. Across New York Harbor, people grabbed cabs, or walked, or ran toward the waterfront to see what had replaced the skyline with fire. In Philadelphia, 90 miles away, residents felt the ground move beneath their feet and assumed an earthquake. In Maryland, people were jolted out of bed. The secondary explosions continued for hours, each one detonating another cache of ammunition on the pier, painting the sky above Manhattan in pulses of orange that witnesses compared to a second sunrise. 4 people were confirmed dead. A Jersey City police officer, the chief of police for the Lehigh Valley Railroad, the captain of one of the barges, and a 10-week-old baby who had been sleeping in a crib near the waterfront and was thrown by the blast. More than 100 people were injured. Property damage exceeded $20 million in 1916 dollars, somewhere north of $500 million in today's terms. By sunrise, investigators were already on the scene. By that same afternoon, they had reached a conclusion. The explosion, they announced, was an accident. The chief of the Bureau of Investigation filed a preliminary report stating, and this is a direct quote from the document, "Our investigator seems to think that the explosion was an accident." On July 31st, the day after the blast, the New York Times ran a headline that deserves to be read slowly. On one point, the various investigating bodies agree, and that is that the fire and subsequent explosions cannot be charged to the account of alien plotters against the neutrality of the United States. Within 24 hours of the largest act of terrorism on American soil, the official conclusion was settled. Senior officials of the Lehigh Valley Railroad and the National Dock and Storage Company were arrested for criminal negligence. German sabotage was dismissed. 3 months earlier, a German sabotage ring in New York had been publicly tried for using the exact same glass pencil incendiaries on the exact same type of target. The technology was documented in court records. The network was partially mapped by investigators, and yet the possibility of German involvement in an explosion at a munitions pier stacked with war supplies bound for Germany's enemies was, officially, not worth pursuing. President Wilson described Black Tom as a regrettable incident at a private railroad terminal. Wilson was in an election year. His campaign was running on a single, powerful slogan: "He kept us out of war." An act of German state-sponsored terrorism on American soil in July 1916, if publicly confirmed, if treated as what it actually was, would have changed the political calculus of that election entirely. The United States might have entered the war 8 months earlier than it did. The outcome of November 1916 might have been different. Wilson understood this. His administration understood this. The investigation proceeded accordingly. Michael Kristof was arrested weeks later, in August 1916, after someone who knew him provided a tip to Jersey City police. He was held briefly, then released for lack of evidence. He drifted in and out of minor criminal trouble for the next 12 years and died of tuberculosis in a Staten Island hospital in 1928. Whatever he knew about that night, the names, the money, the instructions, the access points, died with him. Yankee and Witzke had already solved their evidence problem before the explosion happened. Witzke had applied for American citizenship at a San Francisco federal office on July 25th, 5 days before the blast, establishing his presence on the opposite coast in official government records. Yankee's timesheet from a San Francisco company showed him clocked in and working on July 29th and 30th, 1916, the same days he was rowing a boat across New York Harbor. Both men had prepared their alibis with the same precision they had applied to the glass pencils. Both men escaped prosecution entirely. Witzke was eventually arrested in February 1918 at the Mexican border on espionage charges unrelated to Black Tom. He was convicted by court-martial and sentenced to death. The war ended before the sentence was carried out. President Wilson commuted it to life. By 1923, Witzke was free and back in Germany, where he eventually served the Third Reich with the same dedication he had given the Kaiser. Yankee followed a similar trajectory: intelligence work for the Nazis, capture by Soviet forces, execution in April 1945. Neither man was ever charged with Black Tom. The truth arrived slowly, carried not by any government, but by a young Wall Street lawyer named John McCloy, who was hired by the Lehigh Valley Railroad in 1930, 14 years after the explosion, to pursue damages from Germany under the Treaty of Berlin. McCloy was 35 years old when he took the case. He spent the next decade investigating it, building a paper trail through financial records, intercepted German communications, testimonies extracted from reluctant witnesses across 3 continents, and the painstaking reconstruction of a spy network that had been specifically designed to leave no forensic trace. In June 1939, 23 years after the blast, the German-American Mixed Claims Commission ruled that Imperial Germany had authorized and executed the Black Tom sabotage. Germany was ordered to pay $50 million in damages. Adolf Hitler's government declined. Another world war intervened. Another 14 years passed. In 1953, West Germany agreed to settle its outstanding war claims. The final payment to Black Tom claimants was processed in 1979. 63 years after a telegraph key fell silent on a pier in New Jersey. 63 years after a barge that was not supposed to be there destroyed what no one was supposed to touch. John McCloy went on to become one of the most consequential figures of the 20th century. Assistant Secretary of War under FDR, American High Commissioner in occupied Germany, President of the World Bank, Chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations. Before he became any of those things, he was the lawyer who spent a decade proving what the Bureau of Investigation had dismissed in a day. And it was McCloy who was sitting in the Oval Office in early 1942, when FDR was considering the internment of Japanese Americans. Roosevelt, who had been Assistant Secretary of the Navy during World War I and knew the Black Tom case intimately, reportedly said they could not afford another Black Tom. The same explosion that Wilson's administration had classified as an industrial accident was now being invoked, by name, in private, to justify incarcerating 120,000 people who had nothing to do with it. That is the architecture of what happens when warning cables disappear. The question that was never fully answered was not whether Germany did it. That was settled in 1939. The question was who, on the American side, received the intelligence before July 30th. The security warnings about Black Tom's vulnerability, the known presence of German sabotage networks in New York Harbor, the documented use of glass pencil incendiaries at nearby facilities, and what happened to that information between the moment it was transmitted and the moment it would have mattered. The telegraph logs from the Lehigh Valley Railroad's Black Tom terminal did not survive the explosion. Whatever the man at the key sent and received in the days before the blast burned with the pier, the warehouses, the freight cars, and the 375 by 175-foot crater that replaced them. There is a plaque at Liberty State Park in New Jersey, at the end of Morris Peasin Drive, where the pier used to stand. It is small. Most visitors to the park walk past it without stopping. 2,000 feet across the water, the Statue of Liberty stands exactly as she stood on the morning of July 30th, 1916, when the sky above her was still orange and the shrapnel was still cooling in her copper skin. The torch has been dark to visitors for over a century, not because of restoration, not because of structural caution, but because of what 3 men in a rowboat decided to do one night when the security was thin and the cables had gone unanswered. Somebody knew what was on that pier. Somebody knew the network that was targeting it. Somebody processed the manifests that showed a barge loaded with 100,000 pounds of TNT sitting at Pier 7 because its owner refused to pay $25. The last person who sat at that telegraph key and routed those transmissions is long gone, and the records went up with the pier. But the torch is still closed, and if you know what you're looking at, that is answer enough.